Good day, my name is Velalan Bonifdijk, and today what we're going to do is run through an article that we've written about event-driven orchestration for Knative and VMware using Directive. If you want to follow along on the Medium article, just search for it. It's also on our blog, so blog.directive.io. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to configure our Knative eventing with the VMware vSphere events as a source and the destination being our Directive service orchestration engine. We're going to then use a Power CLI container to firstly run a hardening check script on the VM. The Power CLI container will also output that back as JSON into the Directive engine, and that happens on an event that equals a VM start, so a VM start condition that's received. We'll then evaluate the hardening index, see if it's below 75. If it's below 75, we'll send an email to admin, and we'll use the Twilio email sender. Alternatively, we're just going to write a note back into the VMware machine, into the note section, to say that is below 75, and send an email in any case just to let us know. So if you want to follow along what we're going to do, the article explains this in detail, and I'm going to run each of the commands in sequence and try and explain what's going on. It's not too hard to follow. So the first thing we need to do is we need to obviously get the Directive engine running, and for that we're going to be using the open source edition that's available on GitHub if you go to our GitHub page. And this just runs Directive as a container. It also has the eventing components installed, running the eventing components. If you want to follow along, like I said, we're going to go through each step in this article and show you what it actually looks like at the end of the day. Docker logs Directive 1SF, so this shows us what's happening in the backend, and you can see that the container is unpacking. We're installing K3s, installing all the Knative components, and lastly we'll install Directive. What's happening on the other side on the article is once everything is installed, we will be able to access Directive on port 8080 on this local host machine, because we are mapping the ports to port 80 on the container side. So we'll sit here and watch for this to complete, and then we'll carry on with the actual event integration as well. So how the eventing is going to work, we're going to open a Docker shell or a shell to the Docker container. And then we're firstly going to install the VMware vSphere Knative source. Then we're going to apply the actual credentials that we're going to be using. So luckily, we're going to turf these credentials eventually after we're done. This is to connect to the vSphere environment or the ESX or vCenter environment. We'll then create the source, and lastly, we'll send it to the destination, which will be the Directive engine. So let's start by doing this. Just waiting for Directive to be available, and then we're going to carry on. We'll put that in back, let it go, and open up the shell session. So as you can see, nothing strange there. Using Kubernetes, so we've applied alias for kubectl. We've also included Kubernetes bash auto completion in this container. So if you see me double tapping, at least you understand why. So let's install the VMware Tanzu or the vSphere Knative components. So that's done. Now we're going to create the credentials to connect to it. So this is in the gist. We go and have a look. Folder, and somewhere in here is my create secrets gist, and we'll do this. So this just creates the secrets that we're going to use to connect to vCenter. All right, all done. The next step is then to create the connection to Knative from the vCenter to Knative. As you can see, it's just another kubectl apply command. So let's do that. We create the listener. In this case, what's happening is my VMware ESXi environment is hosted on 10.0.0.219, as you can see here. So let's do that. All right. Now you can check the status of this using get resource. all good and ready, which means we're connected to that side, the VMware vSphere side. Right, the next step is to tell it to send it to directive. So again, going back to our gist, we're going to create, apologies, going to create the figure, and it's very simple. All we're doing is we're instructing it to send it to directive using our Knative integration. The only important part here is the URI. That's the namespace in directive that we're going to send it to. So let's do that. And we can check that this is connecting to directive correctly. So let's have a look. True, all good. So now let's go and receive our first trigger. In here you'll see that the VM is shut down at the moment. So what should happen is if we go to directive, locally create a directive, there will be no namespace. We'll have to create the namespace obviously, and we set the directive namespace. Okay, and now let's get our first event going. Also, sorry, important to understand is when we built this VM, we installed the Linux script for the hardening. I'm not going to go into much detail. There's a real good explanation on the website. But let's create our first event. So let's fire up the VM. That's already fired up. Let's power it down first. Power on. Let's go. And you can see we received our events. So really, really simple, event driven. If we follow, what's going to happen next is we want to actually have a look at what the inside of this event looks like. So let's put a simple workflow in place that'll show us what the inside of the event looks like. And let's just build this one. What we're doing now is instructing directive to actually run a workflow when it receives this event. So we'll create the workflow called test event. Doesn't matter what we're going to do because we're going to replace all of this. And all we're telling directive to do is start this workflow based on the COM VMware vSphere VM starting event that we receive. If you go through the article, you'll see that we explain down below what the context and the data is within the event. But if we save this, and obviously we'll need to power this down again. Power off, yes. Right, so let's save that. We'll go back to instances. Nothing's wrong because we haven't powered it on yet. And we can power this on. So we should receive an event again in directive soon when the VM is powered up. And you can see it's already been received. And now what we've done is we've just printed the input and output, or the content of this event that we received. You can see obviously the virtual machine, the type, everything coming from VMware ESXi. So let's shut this down again, power off, and go back to the article. So in the next steps, what we're doing, and by the way, this is the output that I've just shown you in directive. What we're now going to do is we're actually going to create the whole workflow. And this workflow, if we skip down to the bottom, we explain the whole workflow as we go along. But I'm going to take you through the whole workflow config in directive. This is the workflow in the Medium article itself. In the gist, let's just get the whole workflow pasted in and go through it. Right, Control C, and we'll create a new workflow. We'll disable the previous test one, vSphere event workflow. Create workflow, and if we look at what this workflow actually does. So the first thing is this workflow will only start on an event being received, and we're starting event. We're going to close the functions for now. We'll get back to those. The first state is just a started state. So this is the initiation, and we tell directive that when you receive this event, go to the starting state that you're entering into the workflow. We're going to log some data. and we're going to transform the event data coming in. All we're doing with the transform is we're actually just extracting the VM name. But the next step is important, because the next step, what we're going to do is run PowerCLI commands. So these PowerCLI commands use the ESXi password, username, and password. We still need to add them obviously in. And it's important to understand what it's actually doing. It's actually going to pull back the VMware PowerCLI container from our repository, the directive repository. It's going to run invoke VM script, and it's going to be the Linux report that it deletes firstly if it was there already. Then we're actually going to run the Linux report, and then we're going to copy this report so we can use it, the content of it, in directive in the state. So we're adding the content of this JSON report into the next state transition. So, and then we transition on to our check. So there's a couple of transforms, as you can see, as we're extracting data from the state. The check will just go, is the hardening number below 75? This is the hardening number that we received from the Linux script. So nothing untowards here. And then if it's less than 75, we're going to send an email. And in this case, we're going to use SendGrid from Twilio. If it's not, we're just going to write the email, write the note back to say, this is the output from the script, and this note is actually written to this VMware host in the notes field. So I'm going to pause here, and then I'm going to add the usernames and passwords because I don't want anybody to see those, and then we'll get back to this. Okay, we're back, and what we've added is the ESXi password, the username and passwords for the operating system. We decrypt these secrets and use them in the invoke PowerCLI commands that we run against this machine. So again, just removing the old one, running the new one, and taking the data out. And then we added the SendGrid secret, which is what we use to send the email on. And if you look at it, it's all in here, the username, SendGrid, password, and the ESXi password. Right, so next step would be to run the workflow. And obviously to run this workflow, create an event. So let's fire it up. And special note in this case on the workflow is, if we look at it, there is a retry and a max attempt set in here. That's because the operating system might not be available for SSH, because ultimately the invoke VM script uses SSH to do what it needs to do. So the directive will honor the retries and the delays and wait for it to be available based on the settings that you have before it tries to carry on. So let's sit here, and that's exactly what's happening now. You can see that it's trying, and it'll wait. I think it's a maximum of 3 retries. And if we look at the VM itself, happy days, up and running, and there we go. That's the PowerShell now running. That's correct. That's the connection being successful. We are running the script in this case, and we're waiting for the output. There we go. And now we're sending the email. And let's have a look at the output. And we just received the email over here. We bring that up. So there's the complaints, warnings, no password set for single mode, found vulnerable packages, couldn't find 2 responsive name servers, everything is expected. And then in the VM itself, if I can find the notes field, there we go. Done and dusted. Now obviously this is a very, very simple example. And this can be very complex as well. You can add a lot more features and sets to this. But we thought it's a nifty way just to show how we do event-based orchestration workflows. Any questions, feel free to hit us up.